The courtroom went silent. A single father stood before the judge, accused of something he didn't do. When he tried to defend himself, laughter filled the room. They didn't believe him. They didn't take him seriously. But when he opened his mouth and spoke, not in one language, not in two, but in 11 fluent tongues, everything changed. The judge's face went white. The laughter stopped. What happened next revealed a truth about prejudice that no one in that courtroom expected. This is what they never saw coming. Marcus Chen was a quiet man, a single father raising 2 daughters on his own, working double shifts at a downtown hospital as a translator. Most people saw him and assumed things, where he was from, what he could do, whether he belonged. They never bothered to ask. His gift was rare. 11 languages flowed from his lips as naturally as breathing: English, Spanish, Mandarin, Arabic, French, Russian, Portuguese, German, Japanese, Korean, and Hindi. He'd learned them over a lifetime, some from his parents, others from late nights with textbooks after his daughters fell asleep. At the hospital, he was a bridge between doctors and patients who had nowhere else to turn. He saved lives with words. But outside those walls, no one knew who he really was. One evening, Marcus was pulled over on his way home. A routine traffic stop, they said. But when the officer approached his window, something felt wrong. The questions came fast, too fast. Where was he going? Where did he live? What was in the back seat? Marcus stayed calm, answering every question with respect. But calm wasn't enough. Within minutes, he was in handcuffs. The charge? Suspicion. No evidence, no crime, just suspicion. By the time his daughters were asleep that night, Marcus was sitting in a holding cell, trying to piece together what had just happened to him. 3 weeks later, he stood in a courtroom. No lawyer, no one who believed his side of the story, just him, a judge, and a room full of people who had already made up their minds. When he tried to explain himself, he saw it, the smirk, the dismissive glance. They weren't listening. But Marcus had one thing they didn't expect.
The courtroom felt colder than it should have. Marcus stood at the defendant's table, his hands folded in front of him, trying to steady his breathing. The judge barely looked at him when the charges were read. Resisting arrest, obstruction of justice, disorderly conduct. None of it was true, but truth didn't seem to matter here. The prosecutor spoke with confidence, painting Marcus as a threat, a man who refused to comply, who acted suspicious, who didn't belong in that neighborhood. With every word, Marcus felt the walls closing in. He glanced at the jury. Their faces were unreadable, but their eyes told him everything. They'd already decided. When it was his turn to speak, Marcus rose slowly. No lawyer, no one to defend him, just his voice and the truth. He started simple, explaining what really happened that night, how he'd shown his license, answered every question, stayed calm even when the officer's tone turned hostile. But before he could finish, the judge interrupted. "Mr. Chen, do you have any proof of these claims?" Marcus hesitated. "Your Honor, because all I see here," the judge continued, flipping through papers without looking up, "is a pattern of non-compliance. The officer's report is very clear." "But that's not what happened. Are you calling a police officer a liar?" The question hung in the air like a trap. Marcus knew there was no right answer. If he said yes, he was disrespectful. If he said no, he was guilty. The judge leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, waiting. "I'm saying," Marcus spoke carefully, "that what's in that report isn't the full story." A few people in the gallery chuckled, quiet but loud enough to sting. The judge smirked just for a second, but Marcus saw it, that look, the one that said, "Who do you think you are?" "Mr. Chen," the judge said, his voice dripping with condescension, "I've been doing this a long time, and I can tell when someone is embellishing the truth." Embellishing. The word felt like a slap. Marcus's jaw tightened. He'd spent his entire life being underestimated, dismissed, reduced to what people thought he was. But this was different. This could cost him everything: his freedom, his daughters, his future. He took a breath, then another, and when he spoke again, his voice was steady, but there was something else in it now, something they hadn't heard yet. "Your Honor, with all due respect, I don't think you understand who I am." The judge raised an eyebrow. A few more chuckles rippled through the room. Even the prosecutor grinned, like Marcus had just sealed his own fate. "Oh, really?" the judge said, leaning forward now, almost amused. "Then enlighten us, Mr. Chen. Who exactly are you?" Marcus met his gaze. No fear, no hesitation. "Let me show you." The room went silent.
Marcus didn't wait for permission. He started in English, clear, composed, explaining exactly what happened that night, every detail the judge refused to hear. Then, without breaking stride, he switched. Spanish, fluid and natural, repeating the same truth in a different tongue. The judge's smirk faded. The room shifted. People sat up straighter. Then French, then Mandarin, then Arabic. One by one, Marcus spoke in 11 languages, each word precise, each sentence carrying the same unshakable truth. Russian, Portuguese, German, Japanese, Korean, Hindi. His voice never wavered. His eyes never left the judge. The courtroom was frozen. The prosecutor's pen stopped mid-note. The jury stared, mouth slightly open. The people who had laughed moments ago now sat in stunned silence. Even the bailiff, standing by the door, looked like he'd forgotten how to breathe. But Marcus wasn't done. He switched back to English, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "I am a medical translator at St. Grace Hospital. For 12 years, I've helped save lives because patients couldn't speak English and doctors couldn't understand them. I've sat with dying mothers who needed to say goodbye to their children. I've translated diagnoses that changed families forever. I've been the voice for people who had none." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "And tonight, I stood in front of you, a single father, a man who serves this city every single day, and you laughed at me. You didn't see a translator. You didn't see a father. You saw what you wanted to see." The judge's face had gone pale. His hands gripped the bench, knuckles white. The arrogance was gone. The smirk had vanished. For the first time, he had no words. Marcus took one step forward. "So I'll ask you again, Your Honor. Do you understand who I am now?" The silence that followed wasn't just quiet. It was the sound of shame.
The charges were dropped that day. Every single one. The judge didn't apologize. He couldn't even look Marcus in the eye. He simply dismissed the case, shuffled his papers, and moved on to the next file, as if nothing had happened, as if Marcus hadn't just proven everything they'd assumed about him was wrong. Marcus walked out of that courtroom a free man, but freedom felt different now. He went home to his daughters that night, hugged them a little tighter, and realized something he'd known his whole life but had never said out loud. It didn't matter what he accomplished. It didn't matter how many languages he spoke or how many lives he saved. To some people, he would always be guilty the moment they looked at him. That's the part they don't show you, the part that doesn't make headlines. Marcus wasn't just fighting a traffic stop. He was fighting a system built on assumptions. Assumptions about who deserves respect, who deserves to be believed, who belongs. And the truth is, Marcus was one of the lucky ones. He had a skill rare enough to make them stop and listen. But what about those who don't?
What about the people who don't speak 11 languages, who don't have a courtroom moment that forces the world to see them differently? They're still out there, still being pulled over, still being doubted, still being dismissed. Marcus's story ended with vindication, but for millions of others, the story is still being written. On streets, in courtrooms, in moments where one wrong assumption can change everything. So here's the question we have to ask ourselves. How many more Marcus Chens does the world need to see before we stop making assumptions in the first place? Because the real injustice isn't just what happened to him, it's that it ever happened at all.